I have with me Colonel Chris Wyatt, and we are talking about the renouncement by America of the South African ambassador. It's a serious move, Chris, diplomatically.
Well, Isaac Remare, it's good to see you again. Listen, if I were the government of South Africa, the smart money would have been, I would have said
Mm,
the following.
yes.
Ambassador Rasul has spoken in his own personal capacity, does not represent the views of the South African government, and unfortunately, we'll be recalling him and censuring him for his conduct in Washington, where he embarrassed South Africa. We like to keep good relations with the United States, and this is not helpful. That's what I would have done.
Mm,
As far as South Africa occupying a lot of airspace in America, maybe for Joel Pollack, who fancies himself as the next ambassador of South Africa, and Breitbart, and maybe my coverage, but it's not a big issue for America. What happened was that Ambassador Rasul went beyond the pale, Isaac. I mean, this is look.
uh,
I worked in 8 embassies in Africa. I lived in 8 countries where I was stationed embassies. I've worked in over 30 embassies in Africa. I worked in embassies in the Middle East and Europe. And you don't do this. This is not what you do. Listen, I can tell you, it's like the number of times that I met in private with officials from other countries who rubbished my country, said the most terrible things about America. Of course, they're wrong about these issues, but it's in a private
mm,
session. You don't do this in public. He was in a Zoom session, a Zoom call. He knew his comments were being recorded. He said it intentionally, and he did it for purpose. I don't understand what his purpose was, but you don't call the leader of a country, even if it's true, it's not. But if it's true, you don't publicly call them the leader of global white supremacy movement and
mm,
and a country racist. That's just not a good look. And so it's interesting because the initial response from South Africa was very aggressive. EFF, of course, and all these, and Kosatu, and we're going to celebrate him as a hero when he comes back. But you're just celebrating a fool. The man was ambassador for 5 years. He knows the rules. He's been trained as an ambassador by the South African government. He knows you don't do that. He did it for a reason. I don't know if he did it at the behest of the ANC
mm,
or he did it because he was trying to achieve something. But it's beyond the pale. And what's interesting now is that after that initial 24 hours of dumping on America and blaming us for his conduct, it's interesting now because a number of academics and some senior leaders in the government have spoken to Times Live and also spoken to the IOL. And they're like, well, look, we can't defend this. What he did was wrong. You can't do that. You can't say that about your host. So I suspect the government of South Africa is backing away from Rasul a little bit. Now, he may be greeted as a hero by Kosatu when he arrives in Cape
mm.
Town, but they really don't matter in the scheme of things.
And it's certainly not the language to use in a time where it seems the West is getting rid of uh, those feelings of guilt and that everyone wants to load onto you just because you're white.
Well, you're talking about the white liberal guilt
Mm,
tool, which is where the racism card, which has worked for decades. Yeah, the racism card has expired, at least in Washington. Maybe not in Berlin, maybe not in London or Paris, but it's expired in Washington, and it has no currency anymore. You can cry racism all day, and people know it's like the boy who cried wolf, 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 and eventually the real wolf comes, and nobody pays attention. That's the sad part about using racism as a political tool. If it's not genuinely racist and you use it, eventually people just stop listening to you. The word loses its currency. It's like the F bomb in English. People have
mm,
heard the F word so much. It's not, when I was a kid, whoa, you were shocked
yeah.
to hear that word. Now it's no one's shocked by it. And the same thing with racists. Anytime you disagree with someone, you're called a racist, especially if you're white. And it's just a juvenile, idiotic argument. And this has nothing to do with race. I mean, Rasul would be considered white in America, so it has nothing to do with race. So it's really sad to see this sort of thing happen. And again, I don't know what his plan was, but he'd already in South Africa had already angered Washington by the mere fact that he rushed to Washington to present his credentials to the Biden administration a
Mm,
week before Biden left office. That's also unprecedented. No one does that. You wait until the incoming administration. If the election is in November, no country normally sends their ambassador to get credited until the next administration's in. So that raised some suspicions in Washington from the outset. And Ambassador Rasul, I think, was on a short timeline to begin with, and he made it very short.
mm. And then the ANC being in touch, or rather out of touch, with the American government is getting clearer by the day. The way how they handle this diplomatic crisis.
What's interesting to me, Isak, is having spent a lot of time working around Africa. I remember when I was in Liberia, and the defense minister there was very astute politically, domestically. Brownie Samakai understood the politics of Liberia very well. He can move and say what he needed to at the right time, the right place, and push the right levers and get the right donors to do things. But he wasn't very astute internationally, if you understand what I mean. He would try to push levers in Washington and have no effect because he didn't understand which button to push. South Africa, its political leadership seems to have cognitive dissonance. They simply cannot fathom that the actions that they've been doing that have been successful with the press and successful with civil society groups in South Africa and with Iran and with China and with Russia and Brazil, that will work with Washington or other Western governments. And it simply doesn't. It's not working. And they're making one mistake after another. So in South Africa, if you step up and you challenge the government, somebody in the opposition or the other parties, not the ANC, maybe the EFF, MK, they just call you racist and they shut you down. And people are afraid to be called racist, so they run and hide. Well, that ain't working here. So all Trump has done, all he's done is issue 2 tweets on Truth Social. Call them tweet. They call them truths, but call them a tweet, whatever. 2 social media posts, and he's given 1 executive order. That's it. But every day, Trump is called a liar. He's told he's misunderstood. He's misrepresenting. And they're taking the words he said in social media posts and in his executive order, and they're lying. He never said anything about inviting white farmers to the United States. He invited Afrikaners who were suffering from unjust racial discrimination. His description, whatever the United States defines as an Afrikaner. That's not a white farmer. And he talks about unjust discrimination in business, education. That's not about farmers. That's what they believe it to be, and that's what they underlie. Just like the nonsense of Ronnie Lamola telling Deutsche Welle that white South Africans own 80% of the land. That's a myth. It's a total myth. Even if you take the 2017 land audit, which is the most recent data available, the government itself did it. In that audit, 114 million hectares of land are in South Africa. 93 million of them are in private hands in 2017. So that means 21% of the land in 2017 was owned by the government. 93 million hectares. Of the 93 million hectares, the government categorized 36 million hectares as agriculture. That includes, scrubland in the Karoo where sheep graze. So 36 million hectares. Of that, in 2017, 72% of that land was owned by white South Africans. But that represents only 29% of the publicly available land. Privately, people can own it, and only 23% of the surface area of South Africa. So telling people the white farmers own 80% of the land is just a lie, and it inflames things. And that's not working over here anymore because people are actually paying attention. And every time that the ANC or the EFF or Agri-SA or John Steenhuisen or somebody opens up and makes a comment that's misleading, all they do is draw attention to South Africa, and the press over here are on top of that now. They're actually paying attention. It's just not wise. They're poking the bear, and South Africa is not that important. If South Africa were important to the United States right now, I can guarantee you, Isaac, that you would no longer be in the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. The passage of the Expropriation Without Compensation Act eliminated South Africa from legal participation in AGOA. You're no longer allowed in it. By law, you can't be in it. Trump has not suspended that access. That's a gift. And what's he get for it? South Africa's ambassador calling the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, what kind of nonsense is that?
The opposers of Donald Trump here in South Africa makes it off as they call him Trumpy here.
Trumpy and the Buxenbender. I guess there's Buxenbender with Elon and Marco Rubio. It's not me. Maybe Joe Pollak.
And exactly now that. So they make it off as if Donald Trump is on a crazy rampage. And now this call from Marco Rubio is being seen as Rubio, part of the Buxenbender, just echoing Donald Trump. Can you clear that up a little bit so that we understand the current government under Donald Trump a little bit better?
Sure, I can. I've talked about it extensively on my program, but you and I have not had a chance to talk about it. So first off, the notion that this is all Elon Musk is just rubbish. This isn't Elon Musk. Elon Musk is dead center focused on people burning his Teslas at his dealerships and Doge. That's where his attention's at, not South Africa. And it was never on South Africa. That's just a fantasy. It's also not a consequence of Joe Pollak, although Joe Pollak's reporting in Breitbart certainly is drawing attention because that's a network that they listen to. But this problem, this diplomatic row between South Africa and the United States, which the South African authorities act like we didn't know where this came from. Well, how did this happen? That's utter nonsense. They're either dishonest or they are incapable of reading the room. On the 6th of February, 2024, a bipartisan group of members of the House of Representatives came together and proposed a resolution for the U.S. government to review its relationship with South Africa with the intent to end AGOA and the intent to withdraw our attention from South Africa and disengage. Those were Democrats and Republicans. February of last year, Donald Trump was fighting for his life in court cases, trumped up, no pun intended, trumped up court cases and charged against him. And South Africa wasn't even on his mind. This predates Trump. I can run through a list of egregious offenses from the United States perspective, whether South Africans believe it or not, all the different things. Landing a Russian-sanctioned warplane at Waterkloof during a war, doing a naval exercise with the Russians who are sanctioned at war with Ukraine and with the Chinese Navy off the coast of South Africa. You know, that's a bad look. The Lady R incident, and of course, from the South African government's perspective, the Lady R incident is a situation where, well, there was nothing to see. Well, that's nonsense because Reuben Brigady asked for an answer repeatedly for 5 months from the South African government, and they basically told him foot sec. They ignored him. Finally, he went to the public and he told people what the U.S. believed. Now, I'll tell you this about Reuben Brigady. I work for him. He was my ambassador at the U.S. mission to the African Union. He's a very political creature. And Reuben Brigady is a good man, good, but he would not risk his political future because he has ambitions as higher office by stepping out in front of his skis. He didn't do that. That was a message from Washington directing him to do that. Because you notice he didn't get relieved as ambassador because he didn't embarrass America. He did what they wanted him to do. If your relationship with the Biden administration is that fragile, and you want to blame it all on Trump, you're really not reading the room. This is not Trump. If anybody you want to pay attention to, it's Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is very angry about what's going on in South Africa, and he has been for some time. And he's very powerful in Washington. So he's probably one of the people that are involved in this, but they're not reading the room. This is a problem that predates Trump, and it is a problem that is getting demonstrably worse. They keep calling Trump names. They keep calling America racist. And all we have done is suspend aid to the world. And then South Africa, it wasn't about you. You made it about you by attacking Trump. Well, you attack Trump, he'll come after you. But in the priority of things, Isaac, I mean, look, this is, you got Gaza, you got Ukraine, you've got the EU, you got tariffs on China, on Mexico, on everybody. We're resolving all that. South Africa's way down here, brother, way down here. And South Africans seem to think it's all directed to South Africa. I'm sorry, I don't mean to hurt South Africa's feelings. People that know me know I have great affinity for South Africa and great respect for South Africans. But you're yesterday's news. But as soon as Ukraine's done with, as soon as Gaza's done with, guess who's going to float to the top of the pile? And if you keep calling Trump a racist with no justification, I mean, he doesn't bear a grudge, but he doesn't forget. And, you know, there's lots of things South America could do to South Africa, which could be very unpleasant. I don't want to see that. And I think most adults don't want to see that. General Bantu Holomisa and I had a conversation the day before Rasul made these stupid comments. And General Holomisa, of course, the Deputy Minister of Defense and Veterans Affairs, we're talking, and we'd like adults to step into the room. We need to calm down, stop the rhetoric. Let's get around the table like adults and discuss this and air out our differences. And the next day, Rasul calls Trump the Grand Wizard of Ku Klux Klan. Oh my gosh.